Hello, 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 everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back. We're going to be reading another story, more talking about the working chart rather than just the archetypal wheel, which if I'm being honest, I'm still trying to figure out what the difference is in those. And if somebody knows, could you please tell me? So we are on chapter 10. We just got done reading about Carl's chart, which was based on relationships, I believe. And then we went through each one of his 12 houses and his archetypes and how it related to that specific aspect of his life. So now we're going to read Trevor's story, and this is going to be a career chart. And again, we're talking about working charts in this chapter. Trevor, when it was in his early 30s, an ambitious man who dreamed of creating an e-commerce business that held the promise of great and instant wealth. He had all the right pedigrees. Besides a master's degree in business, Trevor spent the previous 10 years learning about business management at 2 corporations. During our work together on his chart, he struck me as having the ability to generate one creative idea after another. It was also apparent, however, that he was afraid to move forward in his e-commerce venture without some safeguard or guarantee that he would not fail. And this conflict between needing a safeguard and taking an intuitive risk is one of the most paralyzing of fears. And I'm sorry, I do have to say this every time. We're still reading Sacred Contracts written by Myss. I do not think I said that when I opened here. We experience many contracts through their shadow side as a result of repressing our intuitive instructions. In this way, we manifest our creativity through the stress of what could be, hanging on to the dreams and visions that we could have expressed in the physical domain of our lives. These dreams or contracts never evaporate. The realm of possibility, I skipped a line. They never evaporate. They remain an integral part of our lives, only we maintain them in the realm of possibility, and we experience them through regret. Wow, yeah, isn't that the truth? Trevor said that he had to take all possible precautions because he intended to approach other people for funding his new venture. In casting his chart, he asked to gain insight into his relationship with money and his need to be wealthy, which lay at the root of his insecurity about actually beginning his venture. Together with the 4 survival archetypes, and remember that's victim, prostitute, saboteur, and child, Trevor chose archetypes that he felt best represented not only his skills, talents, and ambitions, but also his lifelong fears. He chose the beggar archetype because he frankly felt that his pattern represented a controlling force that had been a part of his nature from his earliest recollections. Like so many people, Trevor's profile was rife with contradictions. Just as we are all made up of many voices and many opinions, Trevor believed in himself and was torn by doubts. He had faith in his idea and none in God. Depending on what we're doing and when, we can be buoyed by confidence or devastated with fear. Trevor's chart appears in figure 11, and here is Trevor's chart, in case you are interested. Of course, I know a lot of the text is too small to read, but you can see what he has chosen. All right, so just like with the last one, with Carl's story, we briefly went over each house, and we're going to do that here, starting with 1 and going all the way to 12. So the first house where the ego and personality lies is the beggar. The beggar archetype in Trevor's first house represented his words, his greatest fear, giving the impression that he was incapable of earning his own wealth. Represented in his words. I read that with the wrong inflection. He was determined to present himself as successful, a goal that influenced not just his own persona, but the persona of his environment. His car was a spokesperson for his ego, and therefore it had to be a BMW. He was impeccable about his dress and self-conscious about his manners. The beggar ego validated for Trevor that no amount of elegant clothing could hide his fear that people would not consider investing in his ideas, that they would think of him as a beggar asking for a handout. He realized that until and unless he believed in himself, no one would invest in anything he did. He decided that the question, would I invest in me, would be his mantra for this house. And remember, part of these stories is creating your mantra, your saying for each house. And they don't have to be catchy or a play on word type of saying. They can just be a simple word. Don't think too much into it, according to the author's opinion and with her experience. That's what she says. Okay. The positive aspect of the beggar manifested itself for Trevor as generosity of spirit and financial sharing. He realized that he had been unsupportive of the creativity of other people who also held visions of getting ahead in life. And so he decided that he would confront his insecurities in part by applauding the work of his friends and coworkers. The second house, where our life values lie. And this is where he placed the trickster. Trevor chose the trickster as one of his archetypal companions because it reflected his relationship to God. He always felt braced for God to pull the rug out from under him unless he did everything right. I don't trust God, and I realize that, he said. So I behave myself, thinking that will prevent me from getting any attention from the trickster nature of God. Part of why I fear jumping into my business venture is that I would be responsible for the funds of other people. If something happened where I lost control of my business, I'm not sure how I would handle that. This was more than a fear. It was a superstition that held Trevor hostage. He needed to overcome this shadow theology and try to have faith. I already tell myself that, but looking at this wheel, I don't believe God wants me to fail anymore. I believe that I have obstacles to overcome, beginning with the fact that I don't believe in myself. Not only do I not trust God, he said, I don't think I trust anyone. I am afraid that no matter who I start a business with, they are eventually going to take my ideas and start a new business of their own. This insight stunned Trevor as he recognized that his superstition about the trickster nature of other people was as real an issue as his mistrust in heaven or of heaven. It also provided Trevor with his second house mantra, have faith. All right, now Trevor's third house, self-expression and siblings, and his archetype is Midas. Trevor had a habit of discussing his plans with far too many people, sharing his ideas and visions and exhausting his creative energy. Realizing this, he made a commitment to share his ideas only when necessary and not to look for approval from others by sharing. His third house mantra would be silence. The fourth house, which is home, and he chose the student. The student in Trevor's fourth house represented that he was never sure he knew enough to leave home and pursue life as an adult. Starting his own e-commerce business represented adulthood and independence. I am always reading something more or thinking that I don't yet know enough. I think that's natural. A lot of people feel that they don't know enough to do what they want in their lives. And I realize that shouldn't stop me, but I guess it does. At some point, book learning has to take a back seat to experience. A fourth house student could be symbolic of the message to leave home now. Trevor decided to use that symbol in scripting a mantra for his fourth house, graduate. Fifth house, creativity and good fortune, and he chose the victim. This house represented everything Trevor needed and wanted, as well as what he had already experienced. In spite of all of his business fears, he also thought of himself as lucky and certainly believed himself to be a highly creative person. His fears about failing, he said, were not for lack of creativity or luck. Therefore, he interpreted the victim on this house as an ally, a voice that supported his intuitive instincts when it came to being able to count on himself to generate ideas. I know from my work experience that I am excellent at taking charge of the projects at work. He said, I'm good at managing people and I am dependable. I can sense when something is wrong and I don't get taken advantage of at work. My problem is seeking investment capital for my own ideas. Trevor decided to utilize his positive associations with his victim archetype, scripting the guide phrase, trust my instincts. Sixth house, occupation and health, he chose the wizard. Trevor interpreted his wizard in the house of occupation and health as an omen, validating his self-image and the nature of e-commerce in general. For him, the computer industry was a modern wizard's laboratory, producing unbelievable results with its technological power. The positive qualities that he associated with the wizard archetype, such as alchemy and magic, promised that interventions of good luck and the impossible would happen to him. His mantra for this house would be, make the impossible happen. 7th house, marriage and relationships, and he chose visionary. The visionary in the house of relationships indicated that Trevor needed to find partners in his business project who could understand his vision and not just want to make money from it. His vision was as real to him as a person. He was in a partnership with his own idea of an e-commerce company, and he needed to recognize that he was highly emotional and protective of his project. Business partners who invested in his project for a fast return on their capital, sorry, I thought that was going to be a different inflection, on their capital would be extremely difficult for him to cope with. So the visionary archetype on this house indicated how intimately Trevor was linked to his vision. And if you remember, we're doing a working chart on career. So even though we come to marriage and relationships, because it's a working chart on career, we're not looking at that type of relationship. So you have to remember that with each category, it might sound like that's where it's going to go, but if you're using a working chart for something other than that, remember that and keep that in mind when you're kind of thinking about how it may relate or come into play in your life. Okay. Trevor was linked to his vision. He decided on unity for his mantra because this word represented a quality that he would want in any person on his team. And the 8th house, where other people's resources and also, I believe, legal matters lie. He chose the hedonist. The hedonist in the house of outside resources applied specifically to the issue of Trevor's financial block. Trevor loved good food and wine and wanted to create a website where people could find restaurants in whatever city they preferred and that they were going to, based on the type of food, atmosphere, and wine they preferred. Trevor said, "My business is a hedonist business. It is for people who enjoy the pleasures of life and have the ability to pay for them." The hedonist in the house of money, which is a great partnership, tells me that my success will be enhanced if I cater it to the right audience. I should emphasize pleasure and indulging the self when I finally have the site created. Trevor felt the electricity of guidance kick in when he read this house. This idea makes me feel that I have yet to come near all of the possibilities that lie beneath the surface of my e-commerce idea, he said. For those reasons, Trevor felt that the phrase pleasure and gain contained the key ideas he had to keep in mind in relationship to this house. The 9th house, where our spirituality lies, and he has the wounded child. Trevor felt his child was wounded by abuse that he had suffered early in his life. He also thought of God as a trickster or bully who kicks down your sandcastle. For him, God and money were incompatible, and he could not associate earning a living with remaining spiritually clean. He realized that he had a great deal of thinking to do about the depth of this psychic wound, lest he end up sabotaging his efforts because of an unconscious fear that his desire for success was evil. Toward the goal, Trevor created the guide phrase, spiritually rich. Whenever he felt himself slipping into this particular fear pattern in the future, he intended to focus on this phrase and what it represented symbolically. Simultaneously, he would invite his shadow associations with God and money to surface into his conscious mind so that he could take whatever steps were necessary to heal that wound, including seeing a therapist. The 10th house, where our highest potential lies, and he chose the networker. So I'm gathering that for a working chart, your archetypes are going to fall into a different house. So this is different in that way from an archetypal chart, which those never move. You never change them. But if you're, no, you know what? I'm not sure if anybody knows. do those archetypes change and go into different houses if you're doing a working chart, or do they stay the same? You're just looking at that chart from a very specific vantage point or on a very specific topic. That's my question. I think it's that one. I think it doesn't change, but you're gearing it towards career, marriage, love, money, whatever the case may be. So you're looking at each one maybe from that perspective in that area of your life. I think that's the correct one. I'm sorry. Sometimes I have to verbally think. I have to have my thoughts out loud in order to figure them out. I can usually answer my own question in doing that. I'm sure a lot of you can too. Or figure it out a lot easier than just thinking it in my mind. I don't know. Maybe you're like that too. I think a lot of people are. All right. So highest potential networker. The networker is a contemporary archetype that, as noted earlier, is related to the messenger or herald, which can be traced back to the deity Mercury or Hermes. Trevor was thrilled that his networker archetype was matched with his highest potential. Applied to his financial and business concerns, this archetype and house partnership symbolized the possibility, if not probability, of success. His future rested on his ability to trust his own vision and believe in himself. But the one archetype that represented his computer self now also represented his highest potential. In support of his highest potential, Trevor created the mantra, "One in Wine," which represented his vision of eventually being able to have business connections around the planet. So one in wine, like the drink, W-I-N-E, and the number one, O-N-E. I wonder if he ever did get that. I know this is an older book, but I wonder whatever did come of it. The 11th house, relationship to the world, and he chose saboteur. Trevor wanted to make the saboteur as much an ally in his business as his victim archetype. He wanted to visualize his business as being able to compete and succeed with all other e-commerce sites that were being started all over the world. Given the speed of e-commerce businesses and how many people get the same idea, he was aware that he needed to act on his inspiration as soon as possible. He decided on now as his mantra. And the 12th house, where the unconscious lies, and he chose the prostitute. The prostitute represented Trevor's fear of money and its capacity to control and own him. He was afraid that wealth would be stronger than his character, and that once the ball of success started rolling, he could not count on himself to act ethically. As Trevor considered under what circumstances he could be bought, he said, "It has not been difficult for me to maintain my values so far, but then I've never had to fight to keep alive something that I have created. I think I am very much afraid of the prostitute inside of me, and that my business has what it takes to make that part come out in me." This house represented the beginning point for the work Trevor needed to do as a result of his initial question. He had to come to terms with his personal sense of honor, and he felt very deeply that once he connected with that, moving forward with his business venture would naturally unfold. For those reasons, Trevor chose honor code as his key phrase. As a consequence of casting this wheel, Trevor was able to recognize his whole approach to business. He realized that his ambitions were going to manifest only if he believed in himself. But he also decided to challenge his determination that his plans should unfold exactly as he intended. His method of employing his commitments began with choosing 3 investors and arranging to meet them as soon as possible. "I'm going to present my business plans to these 3 entrepreneurs," he said. "I recognized in doing this exercise that whether I arranged a meeting next week or next month would not really matter, because I would be just as nervous then as I am now. Ultimately, there comes the moment when you just have to move on your dreams." And with his 12 mantras now written on a single index card in his wallet, that's exactly what he did. All right, we've got one more story, and of course the houses to go through with the examples that the author is sharing for the working wheel, and that is Faye's story, and her working wheel is on health and healing. So we're going to read that in our last video for this chapter, and that just leaves chapter 11, which I haven't really looked at yet. So I'm not sure how long it is or what it will really consist of, but we'll see when we get there. So I'll put my bookmark in. We're almost done, guys, almost done. And I have some really great book ideas lined up for you next. I might put up a little video or a post to see if you guys want to vote on it and see what you would like to hear next from me, because I have a few good choices. But anyways, until I see you again, as always, please take care of yourself. Please take care of those around you. I love you all very much, and I will see you again for the last section in chapter 10. Take care until next time. Bye-bye.